Parcel time! Okay. This is what was in the box. Amazon, what about all this extra space, eh? Gosh. These are compostable Ziploc bags. That box could have fit my boots. Hello, we're doing one of my absolute favourite topics today. How old were the disciples really? Disclosure, we don't really know. However, I think they were mostly teenagers. Now, I first wrote that in this book, and before it was published, the theological editor said to me, "Are you sure about that? Because I've never read a New Testament scholar that believes the disciples were teenagers." And I responded, "Yeah, but how many New Testament scholars have you read that have talked about it?" And the answer is 0. No one really talks about it. I had to scout at commentaries from centuries ago to find any information. Traditionally, it just seems that people haven't really cared. And this might be why we have movies and middle-aged art of the disciples all looking like old, bearded, bald men, all of whom look older than 14-year-old Jesus. That's weird for all kinds of reasons. So I think they're mostly teenagers. I'm going to give you 6 pieces of evidence why I think that's true, and then you can go away and decide if I'm talking twaddle or not. Piece of evidence number 1, Jesus himself was a young rabbi. He's only age 30, he's about as young as you can get, and in that tradition, he wouldn't have chosen disciples older than himself. At least we have no evidence from either the rabbinic tradition or the pre-rabbinic tradition, which is what Jesus is a part of a rabbi choosing disciples older than themselves. It's actually pretty normal, pretty commonplace for a rabbi to be followed around by a group of teenagers. I don't see any reason Jesus would have done any differently. Number 2. Most of the disciples, if not all of them, were Jewish. So they'd been through Jewish education. Bet Sefer, Bet Talmud, ends around age 11 to 13-ish. At that point, the very super clever, successful ones, or the wealthy ones, were chosen by a specific rabbi for midrash around the ages of 12 to 15. And if they weren't chosen, and most people weren't, they'd go and apprentice with their dads for a few years, or an uncle or a neighbour, and then they take off and work for themselves. And this is when Jesus picks up Peter, James and John. They're in the boats mending nets with their father, and Jesus says, "Follow me." They're on that apprenticeship, so they're around the age for midrash, give or take a couple of years, up to age 17, maybe. Piece of evidence number 3, only Peter of the 12 disciples pays temple tax. This needs a little bit of unpacking, so let's start off in Exodus chapter 30. Exodus 30, starting at verse 13. "Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this," and he talks about the tax to be owed, which is half a shekel, as an offering to the Lord. Verse 14, excuse me. Verse 14, "Everyone who is numbered in the census from 20 years old and upwards shall give the Lord's offering." So temple tax is only paid by those over the age of 20. Now flick forward to Matthew 17. Matthew 17 from verse 24. "They came to Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma." I love that word, drachma. 2 drachma tax went up to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the tax, temple tax," what Exodus 30 was talking about? And he said, "Yeah, he does." And a little bit further down, Peter goes into the house. All the other disciples are there. We know about from verse 25 and verse 22 and verse 14. They're all together. And he says, these guys are asking about tax. Jesus says, we're basically exempt because we're children of the Lord. However, go to the lake, pull in a fish, open the fish's mouth, and you'll find temple tax enough for 2 people, 4 drachma. Pay it for yourself and for me. Now, all your disciples are there, and Jesus says, "I want to do this not to cause offence." I think if you're only paying it for 2 of you, and there's 11 more people there, offence is still going to be made. I think the most straightforward and obvious way to read this is only Jesus and Peter were eligible to pay temple tax, and so they're the only ones over the age of 20. Piece of evidence number 4, and this is probably my weakest argument. This one's quite poor, but hey, we'll roll with it. Jesus calls his disciples teknion or teknos, and it means kids. It means little children. And sure, rabbis talked about their disciples in affectionate terms. Teknion is an affectionate, hey, my children, come round and gather and let's roast marshmallows. It is an affectionate term. However, I don't believe it works for peers and people older than you. If Jesus was talking to people his own age or older than him and calling them teknion, I think there would have been questions. I think it makes more sense if he's calling those younger than him teknion than those who are older than him. Oh. Piece of evidence number 5, and this one's a fun one. We need Bible again. And we're going to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew 20, it's titled in mine, A Mother's Request. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, it's James and John, came up to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling before him, she asked him for something, and he said for her, "What do you want?" She said, "Say these 2 sons of mine will sit on your left and your right in heaven." And Jesus basically rebukes this and says, "Are you really sure you can do this?" And he asks them a question and they answer it, and then the other 12 get indignant. But basically the important thing to notice here is they're not married, they're still under the very strict hand of mum. Mum is the one presenting the request. Mum is the one negotiating with their rabbi on their behalf. So they're younger than typical marriage age, which is sort of 13 to 19 depending on gender. Women tended to get married younger than men. And they're still really under the hand of mum. My final piece of evidence is biology. Many of the disciples had long and fruitful ministries after the ascension of Jesus. We think that John wrote the book of Revelation 66 years after Jesus ascended. So if he's 30 when he's chosen, and then he goes through 3 years with Jesus, do we think John is realistically 99 years old when he writes Revelation? I mean, it's possible, but that's old by today's standards, and it doesn't seem reasonable to me. So Peter, we know, was married, paid taxes. Matthew was a tax collector. That's quite an education-heavy job, but again, probably an apprentice. So maybe we can assume those are over the age of 20, but I think the disciples are mostly the early to late midrash age, so that puts them between the ages of 12 and 17 when they're chosen. So I think we are effectively talking about a group of young people. A youth group, maybe. Perhaps they did lock-ins and nerf wars. Probably not. But worth remembering, I believe that the evidence, I think, points us towards young disciples, not middle-aged or older disciples. There's my 2 cents, and I guess, tell me what you think.
Hi folks, thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please remember to subscribe, like, and do check out the other videos as well.